This video was made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details.
I remember growing up as a Nintendo 64 owning kid and glancing over at the PlayStation library and being incredibly jealous of the Japanese RPGs that dominated the landscape over there. I was over here playing Quest 64, while Squaresoft was releasing numbered Final Fantasy games every year, alongside a dozen neat and weird things, and the likes of Konami were putting out Suikoden's. The late 1990s were incredible for JRPGs, but Nintendo largely missed out. That trend continued for quite a while. Now, on the Nintendo Switch, you can play a lot of those legendary JRPGs on Nintendo systems for the first time. Join me as I lay out a handful of neat, previously non-Nintendo JRPGs that are now playable on the Switch. So, first off, I feel like it goes without saying that there are a buttload of Final Fantasy games on Switch, predominantly ones that were previously never on a Nintendo console before. You've got mainline entries, including the landmark Final Fantasy VII and its PlayStation 1 follow-ups 8 and 9. The PlayStation 2 entries are repped by Final Fantasy X, X-2, and 12. And even Final Fantasy 15 shows up, kind of, in Final Fantasy 15 Pocket Edition. But those all feel like gimmies. So for the sake of this assortment, we're going to focus on some of the slightly less obvious picks. Still, with Cloud and Sephiroth both playable in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, maybe Final Fantasy VII is a must-play for the Nintendo faithful. 7 and 8 are both really strong remasters with helpful, optional speed-up and power-up toggles that can iron out some of the 90s CD technology design artifacts. I still, maybe embarrassingly, haven't played more than a few hours of 12, but I've heard really good things about that Switch port as well. But overall, this is a great assortment of previously PlayStation-only RPGs, all available on Switch. Now that we've gotten those major games out of the way, let's go through a few other Square Enix adventures dropping in on this list. Star Ocean First Departure R is an HD remaster of a 2008 PSP remake of a 1996 Super Famicom game. So it almost doesn't count by the rules they laid out for this list, which are games that were never previously on a Nintendo console in any region. But Star Ocean is such a non-Nintendo franchise that this good game needed some more love. It's very much in line with Bandai Namco's Tales series in terms of action RPG combat, but the blend between spacefaring sci-fi and traditional fantasy gives it a very distinct vibe, maybe even better by a banger of a soundtrack from Motoi Sakuraba. The combat is breezy and fun, as you control one character in real-time battles, and the AI controls the other ones. A neat recruitment system makes the complexion of your party different depending on your choices. You can have 8 characters in total, with half of them being selected between a group of 6. This is overall a very straightforward port of a 2008 remake, but Star Ocean First Departure R is a very fun adventure. Sticking with Square games on a Sony handheld, let's hit on Saga Scarlet Grace, the most recent entry in the Saga series and one of the many available on Switch. This, however, is the only entry on Switch so far that didn't debut on a Nintendo platform first. That will hold true until the release of the PlayStation RPG Saga Frontier, which is out either hours or days, or it's already out, depending on when you're watching this. It's very soon. Scarlet Grace is a very interesting game. Its origins are on the Vita, but only in Japan. It wasn't until an updated version made its way to other platforms that the RPG came west, launching on Switch and those other platforms in December 2019. While it retains Saga's trademark battle system, where characters don't level up traditionally, and instead learn abilities semi-randomly during battles, Scarlet Grace doesn't have a lot of other traditional JRPG mechanics. It's so focused on the battle system that overworld exploration is done on a point-to-point map, where you essentially are just going from battle to battle and event to event. The story is also a major focus, and you can select from 4 different characters at the beginning that each have their own distinctive story. A wild, non-linear story allows for so many possibilities, but the more streamlined design encourages more replay to see the different sides of the world. Much like every other Saga game, Scarlet Grace isn't for everyone, But if you're looking for a unique narrative structure and highly strategic battles, this is a fine place to go to. And hey, you can prep for Saga Frontier, or even go further back in Saga time and play the Game Boy trilogy that came out in December 2020 in Collection of Saga. Now let's take a break from the Square RPGs and touch on ones that have Sega origins. The fact that the Grandia series is playable on a modern platform is a small miracle. The first game debuted on the Sega Saturn in 1997, before a port to PlayStation almost seemed essential for survival following the Saturn's swift death. It's developed by Game Arts, who had previously made the Lufia series that, well, hopefully will be re-released some year. A wonderful sense of scope and adventure tied in with some fantastic animation makes this hold up decently well in the modern era. The turn-based combat system is also interesting. After encountering an enemy on the map, you go to a fast-paced battle system that sort of feels like a cross between Final Fantasy's active time battle system, something akin to Tales. But Grandia allows for a lot of fun combos and choices, even as basic as trying to use critical hits to interrupt an enemy's turn meter, or properly using combo hits to counter an enemy attack. Grandia 2 is also a part of this collection. That has another checkered legacy, first debuting on the Dreamcast in 2000, before reaching a much wider audience on the PlayStation 2 in 2002. The sequel features a similar battle system, and a story that, at least in my eyes, is on par with the original. They're not really that connected, but they carry forth a very similar sensibility, and I highly recommend checking them out. Next up is something outside of the hallowed RPG pantheon. It's Moon Remix RPG Adventure, originally made by Love to Leak and remastered for Switch by Onion Games. Moon is unlike any RPG I've ever played. Or maybe to put it differently, the fact that this game originally came out on PlayStation in 1997, Japan only unfortunately, is mind-blowing for how much it predated games that it feels like it's inspired by. There's the clear through line of Moon having some Earthbound feelings and influencing Undertale, but the more striking comparison to me is how much it reminds me of The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, but with way more complexity and oddity, as well as, well, no combat to speak of. Moon can be a tough nut to crack, but if you can take the time to get to the center of this forgotten 90s legend, it's an endearing and enduring masterpiece. I recommend, though, not shying away from a guide if you have some trouble, because it takes a while to adjust to the weirdness of Moon. It's a meta take on the RPG, as you control a ghost boy who has to repair the world the classic hero destroyed when he, quote-unquote, saved it. It's all about making people happy, bringing love to the world, and reviving all the animals the hero slaughtered. It's hilarious, heartfelt, and bizarre. They don't make games like this that often, and it's extremely well worth trying to understand this one. It's also notable for the team behind it, as ex-Squaresoft developers created it back in the day. Those folks went on to make the later Paper Marios, Chibi Robo, Captain Rainbow, and Little King's Story. Next up is Tales of Vesperia. It's one of the most beloved entries in the series that actually came before Star Ocean. Tales of Vesperia originally came out on that noted JRPG beast, the Xbox 360. It was later ported to PlayStation 3, but this is also a Nintendo platform debut. Not only does Vesperia offer a great playing action RPG, but it has a sublime cast of characters to drive you through to the end. It's not just the leads Yuri and Estelle who get all the shine, though their relationship does a great job in driving the story forward. The full cast is fleshed out by subquests and talking head skits that serve as the Tales series trademark. The Switch version is even worth playing for veterans, as it's based on the previously mentioned PS3 version that offered additional story content. In an RPG, the story is only half the game. Thankfully, Tales of Vesperia delivers on that front as well. It might have a strange name. If you can guess what linear motion battle looks like on the first try, you're better at this than we are. But it's best explained as an action battle system where more speed means better rewards. Since you can play with any member of the party, even the dog, there's a lot of different fighting styles to play with. The Legend of Heroes series from developer Nihon Falcom is long and vast, dating back to the Super Famicom. If I were to go deep into that, well, that's probably its own video. Most of the games are locked to PC or platforms in their death throes, but with Trails of Cold Steel 3, the series is back on Nintendo systems. However, Cold Steel 3 might not be the best entry point. It's the third entry in the Cold Steel series, and the 8th in the Trails series, and the 13th in the Legend of Heroes series. It's a lot. I'm very overwhelmed. What's worth knowing about the Cold Steel series is that the story is incredibly deep and rich, telling the story of a nation in the threat of war through the perspective of hero Reen Schwarzer, and a wide and deep cast of characters. The battle system is snappy, a turn-based system using the Tactic Link system that lets characters cooperate on attacks, can make for devastating combos, and also helps keep the pace of battles faster. Now, here's the conundrum. As of April 2021, Cold Steel 3 and 4 will be available on Switch. It's highly unlikely the preceding two games will ever come to the system. Publisher Xseed handled the localization and Western release of the first two Cold Steel games, while NIS America has worked on the last two. They're not exactly like best buds and not really friendly companies, and it seems like NIS America has the rights to the Trails games right now, but not the localization work Xseed did for the other games in the series. So if you want to play these all on Switch, you're out of luck. You can grin and bear it, like Jordan Rudek, and play Cold Steel 3 and 4, or go my route and bust out the PC and or Vita to play the first two Cold Steel games before coming to play 3 and 4 on Switch. Sticking with Falcom, let's go to Easy Street. Get it? As an early title for the Switch that was geared much more towards running on the PlayStation Vita, Ys 8 Lacrimosa of Dana isn't much of a looker, but give it a couple hours and you'll be too hooked to care about visuals. Ys 8's charming prehistoric island setting is underpinned by a story of survival and a mysterious lost civilization. Having shipwrecked on a supposedly cursed island, you'll set off on a quest to reunite with survivors, build a settlement, and hopefully find a way home as you unravel the island's mysteries. At various points, you'll switch to playing as Dana, a native of the island, as you learn more about the island's history. Combat is real-time and fast-paced. You'll directly control one party member, while the AI manages the others, though you can freely swap between any of them in an instant. Each possible party member has their own set of abilities, and can do bonus damage against enemies based on their weapon type. This is the type of game that sneaks up on you. You don't realize just how invested you've become till you try to go and play something else, but you just keep coming back to Ys 8. Even if you've never touched another game in the series, Ys 8 is an engrossing experience. Though, it'd be cool if some of those other Ys games come to Switch. And while Ys Origins is cool and all, Talkin' Oath and Felghana, Memories of Celceta, those games are awesome. And those are the various JRPGs making their debuts on Nintendo consoles for the first time on Switch, but we have even more on the way in 2021 and hopefully beyond. In April, there's Saga Frontier, which might be out right now, depends on how quickly I edit this video after I record the audio. Frontier first came out in 1997 on PlayStation, but the hook behind the game is that you have 7 different stories to play, well, 8 in the remaster, since it adds a new playable protagonist, and it all uses the free scenario system. Super open-ended because of this structure, with a ton of side quests. If you happen to play Romancing Saga 2 or 3, both Super Famicom games brought to Switch, then some of these ideas should be familiar, since Frontier is the next entry in the series after those two. I personally have never played Frontier, and I'm very excited to play it for the first time. The next RPG, making its Nintendo console debut, is Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne, which comes out on May 25th. The Atlas RPG first came out on the PlayStation 2 in 2003, should be somewhat familiar to anyone who played Shin Megami Tensei 4 on 3DS. It's got the series' trademark post-apocalyptic story, filled with religious references and demons. The press-turn battle system is here to emphasize finding weaknesses, and you need to get your conversation skills going with some demon recruitment. The remaster had a mixed reception when it first came out in Japan last year, but a few game updates since then have hopefully smoothed out some of the rough edges. Our last upcoming game is another Square game, Legend of Mana. Following Trials of Mana's port and remake, this 1999 PlayStation entry is joining in on the fun on June 24th. Directed by series creator and ever Oasis director Koichi Ishii, Legend of Mana has the series' trademark action RPG gameplay, but experiments with a more offbeat narrative. There isn't a strong core story per se, as you have the freedom to create the world around you by placing different artifacts that make distinctive areas with their own quests. Like Saga Frontier, I've never played this one before, but it's infinitely more appealing to me now than it was back in the day, because I feel like I appreciate more narrative experiment games. The one thing 100% awesome about Legend of Mana is the soundtrack from legendary composer Yoko Shimomura, who you might know from Super Mario RPG, Kingdom Hearts, and the Mario & Luigi series. It's an absolute masterpiece of a soundtrack. Hopefully you learned some things about some cool RPGs that are making their Nintendo console debuts on Switch. It's a varied and fascinating collection of games that will hopefully get bigger and bigger as the system ages. What are some games we missed, or maybe some other PlayStation exclusive RPGs you want to see come to Switch? I know I do terrible things to see Chrono Cross come to Switch, and it would be very cool to see Xenogears and Xenosaga games on the platform to complement Xenoblade. Maybe, Panzer Dragoon Saga? Always wanted to try that one, and it is completely cost prohibitive to try to obtain right now. Well, thank you very much for watching, and we'll talk to you soon more about RPGs and other fun Nintendo stuff as well. Bye.
This video was made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Did you know that Nintendo World Report is funded directly by fans like you? When you support Nintendo World Report on Patreon, you get immediate access to multiple exclusive podcasts every month, exclusive Discord channels, an early look at select content, and more, all for as little as $1 a month. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details.